So our keynote address is celebrating OPCA, then and now. The great Daryl Cloud, yes, and Howard Wingert. And then Sam will speak, and then I will tie things up very quickly at the end. So again, welcome, and this is celebrating OPCA, then and now.
I think on behalf of the Ohio Precast Association, I want to thank everybody for showing up. We've got a great turnout here this afternoon, and we're very grateful for it. I'm going to refer to my notes. Tony asked that I hold this session down to about 2 hours. So I'll try not to keep everybody, you might want to take a nap and check out for a little bit. But I'm going to take just a minute to share with you not so much how we got started, but why we got started. And it goes back into the early 90s. And there's a number of management frameworks that talk about change management. And all of them have one thing in common. You need some type of crisis or urgency to initiate change. Even to the point if you have to fabricate it, it's perfectly okay to do that. One thing we didn't have to do in Ohio was fabricate the urgency of getting together. There was a company, late 80s, early 90s, that came up with a very prescriptive and unique design for a septic tank. And one of the tactics that they used in promoting that septic tank was vacuum testing. And then they went so far as to go around and find photographs of the least, well, let me back it up for just a second. They found the lousiest looking precast they could possibly find. If it had a big crack in it, if it had a big hole, that's what they would reach into their pocket for a photograph and say, Mr. Regulator, this is indicative of the precast in your market, and we have a solution for your problem. And this started to the point where they went to regulators, state administrators, and actually started working this system at the top and then pulling their system through that way. About the same time, they got involved in a national organization called the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association, NOWRA. They started getting their academics and other engineers involved in this as well. Nobody gave them any resistance whatsoever. They went through Montana, they went through the Dakotas, they went through Minneapolis or Minnesota, and then they hit resistance in Wisconsin, and that's important because you're going to hear Wisconsin mentioned several times during the presentation we're going to put together from some of the founders. The difference in Wisconsin, as opposed to any other state prior to that point, was that Wisconsin had a very well organized and established Precast Concrete Association. That is, to this day, is still predominantly a septic tank organization. And they had a really good relationship with the state regulatory officials and the health department. So when this company came in with their tactics of saying, you need to use our tank and nobody else's, and do this vacuum testing, the state people went to the Precast Association and said, hey, what's your take on this? What do you think? It gave them the first opportunity to actually dig their heels in and actually fight back against this. It got to the point, even at one point, where they were even trying to disallow mid-seam septic tanks because of differential settling. And that was another situation where things were really taken out of context. Things were just totally misrepresented on tanks coming apart. But about the same time, we knew that people in Michigan, as a result of the Michigan On-Site Wastewater Association, as well as the Ohio Department of Health, were getting this same message from this organization. So at that point, we knew that, we, meaning the precasters, especially the septic tank manufacturers, needed to get together and create a voice that we can actually go and actually combat some of the tactics that were being used as far as misrepresenting the quality of precast concrete septic tanks. And that's really the seed that just kind of got everything going from that point on. So Sam, I'm going to have you, we're going to have a number of people give their recollection as to how it got going.
I wasn't in it until they had a precast meeting in Dayton. We had a fella who was in precast business in Dayton who died during the convention.
Oh my gosh.
When we first met, yeah. And his name was Yoko. Ted Coons and his dad from Columbus, they really helped a lot getting the association going, you know.
So was that what essentially then became NPCA?
Yeah. I don't recall of any meetings we had, except when they started talking about national, you know. I used to be able to call somebody if I got a call, somebody wanted something, and I wanted to make something. Well, I would just look at the book and find out who made it and call them up, and there was I never had any problem with them talking to me and telling me, give me information. They were going to make it so that if you wanted to put in a septic tank, you had to have a permit out of Washington. You can imagine what that would be. And I went to Washington and met a bunch of wheels, you know, and it was voted down. They never went through with it. We used to discuss also customers that we had that didn't pay us, because they just go get off somebody else, you know. And that worked pretty good too.
Yeah, so in the late 90s we got together. The biggest reason would be for some of the state septic tank regulation. You know, they were trying to regulate more at the state level as compared to the county level. And we were for some of it because we wanted to try and standardize the products, which still is a fight today. And, you know, the other thing at the time was the DOT, the certification program. Some of the directors down at DOT had their own certification program in mind, and we were working towards trying to promote the NPCA plant certification program. So that was definitely the right direction, and we were successful. Most of the producers that were making statewide products got together and were able to get the state certification in place instead of, you know, it was Lloyd Welker at the time, the director of the state materials, their program, which is a lot more stringent and more product-based instead of plant manufacturing-based. So that was a good, that was a good focus to get us all started. And, you know, same group, and you know them, you know, obviously John Lundrum from Norwalk, and then, let's see, we had some folks from Mac and United, and Babbitts were there, and McGill's were there, and Jim Booman was there, and, you know, so it was a good group of us that could team together and, you know, get some things done. The state was very willing to work with all of us as a group, which is why, you know, we worked together to get the organization started. I wish I could say we were done with the, you know, the state Department of Health regs, but of course that's not the case. But you know, I do know the plant certification has evolved over the years quite a bit with new changes and additions to, you know, modify the program as the regulations have changed. So that's been a very positive program. Actually, I started in 1986, okay. And then that was part-time, full-time after graduating college in '91.
Okay.
So yeah, I knew most all the first generation of all these mainly through NPCA, because OPCA really didn't exist, but we'd run into each other at bid openings and different things like that.
Right.
But you know, the generation that's still involved, they're still my friends, and I ran into them, you know, just in Denver last week for the national show. So it's always good to get the group together. It's amazing though when you go back through the list of the people that are, you know, no longer in business or no longer around and things like that. So yeah, we've lost quite a few over the years.
I was always interested in concrete. I worked for a construction company for a while. I went over to India on a construction job and did some concrete work over there. And when I came back, I thought I wanted to stay in Ohio, and I wanted to be in business for myself, you know. And so I started putting in septic tanks and doing excavating work, and I just grew and grew, and I started making my own septic tanks because I couldn't buy decent ones. There's a couple little outfits made them, and they were terrible. Competitors who I was bidding against to put these septics in, they wanted to buy from me, you know. So the other guy has sort of disappeared, you know.
It's a unique industry, and the more you talk to people in other industries, you realize how special this is because you know, we mentioned all the people. It is a great group of people, and you know, we respect our employees, and you know, all the way through, and then network with all the other folks. And to me, that's the most important thing about the state and national organizations. You know, the networking and getting to know people and share ideas, like Roland said, and just you know, help each other out. What's neat about this industry is, you know, once again, you're building something in America. That's rare nowadays, you know. And you know, you're starting with raw materials: sand, water, gravel, and cement. You know, you're starting with the earth, and you're making a product that, you know, solves things for the, you know, the peoples, the community, the environment. And you know, it's a great product. You know, concrete's you know, it's the best building material there is. Learn from those who have that vast knowledge and experience. Reach out to your colleagues and friends, both in the industry and you know, other areas of the business. And you know, always, you know, we've always respected our employees, and you know, we try to keep a family environment here. You know, that's the nice thing about this product and this industry. You know, it's even the big companies that are owned by, you know, offshore folks and things like that. When you get to know them, it's definitely a family environment. So it's a good group of people to work with.
If I remember right, MPCA was around 1965, 1966 when that was started, and Dad started in '67. But he pretty much, a lot of times, my mom and Dad, Mr. and Mrs. Oldham, both went to a lot of the early meetings. Well, there were several attempts, and just like the last rendition of OPCA, that usually started due to concern about some government regulation or new laws that were going to be passed, and they would, you know, you'd have the crisis of, okay, what's proposed, and then everybody kind of get together, and then now that it kind of die off, and then everybody kind of drift apart. The biggest threat to small business is the government and regulation, and one person is not going to, unless you're a Buffett or a Bezos, is not going to alter that fact. So you have to get together because you need the numbers. What we were faced with back when we got this thing rolling was the sewage rules, and we had regulators and academia that wanted this, were trying to throw out these rules and regulations in a utopian world that it wasn't reasonable or affordable. You know, precasters, what in Ohio is kind of unique, and I think a little, in some ways, one, it's all family, and in second and third generation family in a lot of cases. And everybody's got the drive and to succeed, and that also makes you a little independent. And sometimes people don't want to come together. And then sometimes with families and competing, there's, you know, it's hard to overlook a few things that have happened, and that's So it was, I think that was, and it's always been, in the early years, it was associated with the sewage treatment industry because that's what we all did. We made septic tanks, then the home aeration, which was Jet, Norweco, and we had our own aeration system. Coates and West Milton had their own aeration system. Ashland Bald had Roll Air, had their own. So there was a lot of jockeying around in a lot of different aspects of the business. Just trying to get people, and it's like, every organization kind of has the same problems to get people involved and even to get people to commit, to join, especially with just like I said before, the nature, there's some competitiveness there, but the threat at that time was pretty great. So we did have some with John and Mike Hoffman at Lindsay and myself and Mike Steiger and Bill and Bob Shank. And I'm going to leave somebody out, but some of those folks. And then we leaned on the vendors, the suppliers who had experience with some of the other states who had very vibrant precast organizations, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and A-Lock and concrete sealants and Pressy, a lot of them, kind of helped, and it just challenged to get organized and try to figure out what the best way to get somebody to represent us. I think the precast business, up until recently, and it kind of still is, was one of the last freewheeling, entrepreneurial, do-your-own-thing businesses out there. I think the most important thing is when you're coming up is to remember who your bosses are. Your bosses are the customers. If you don't have the customers, you ain't got anything. Do things right, give good service, fix your screw-ups, and stay involved. The first time when I brought some partners in when we really grew, one of them, he always said, never be afraid of a large corporation. I won't mention any names, but there was one precaster that hung another one precaster out a hotel window about 5 stories up one time. But, fortunately, they got him back inside, but that was...
The initial OPCA, the individuals there were the founders for the most part of the businesses and that. And I think when there was a common need, they could put their egos aside long enough to discuss. But there was definitely an issue with egos, and the agendas weren't. They were self-satisfying agendas and that as far as that goes. The initial group were great, hardworking individuals. Had this latest group that we've had now for a number of years, had we gotten started off on the same footing that group did, we wouldn't be in existence right now. I mean, they unfortunately just could not get along well enough to fight the common cause. We all realize we have there's more than one common denominator out there. There are so many issues, and it's easier to do a lot of them as a group than it is to do individually. And it's good to have the group that we have out there right now. I don't feel threatened by anybody. I feel that we're all in the same boat, and I don't mind sharing an oar with them if they need it. So. And they do the same for us. So it's not like we're taking work away from each other. It's actually helping each other, stay self-sufficient there. So. Dad always liked it. Dad was an old farm boy. I know Dad was involved in the Gimmicks and Gadgets Award a few years there, won it a few different times. And Dad got his one just for a wire and rolling machine. And it was a very, I mean, to look at it, it's quite simple, but yet, to go out and buy it that day or have someone make one would have been, more than what we could afford. He modified and took care of it on his own. We have done a great job of not only getting together to discuss common issues, but we've managed to get a lot of our associates on board that have, are common to just about all of us. But it's nice to see them get involved, and I've always respected what the associates do for, for both our state group and of course our national group. We appreciated what OPCA has done as far as giving us some direction, making calls and trying to see what was available, for our membership in that, and helped us get some direction there. You have to hope that you get the right individuals, and of course, in a family-run business, it's more or less assumed that you'll work the ladder and come out on top eventually. And getting people to take that risk now, it's one thing for somebody to just give somebody a credit card and let them go out and just spend it on whatever, and then if there's no responsibility to how you're going to pay pay everything back, you're not going to gain anything out of it. It's tough to get people that will buy into and have the company's best interest in mind when they're making purchases, when they're giving leadership to people. And there is there's still plenty of business out there for precast concrete. It's never ending, really. Again, the keys to anything are how viable is your product to the markets that you're in. Looking at are we really putting out the product that's going to drive us in that market, or is that market stale and we need to look elsewhere? Would you want it to be safe for handling, safe for installation, and you want it to last, for as long as possible? Again, as a group, we can do more for the dollar than individually.
If we go back and look at the old time and the old association, my recollection is a lot of people traveling through Norwalk that were precasters. E.C. Babbert, probably one of the most memorable, just because as kids we loved him. He was a clown, and a professional clown. So he was always full of jokes, which was a lot of fun if you're younger.
Yeah.
Some other memorable people that wandered through the door. Gene Hoffman from Fostoria, who's no longer with us, but he was a bear of a guy and a lot of fun around the kids. I suspect that there's a lot of stories that shouldn't be told about that group in the early days. I do remember them, and there's some great folklore over the years, and I guess we'll have to say let the innocent remain. So you can just imagine some of the personalities of those independent businesses and the times that we were in the 60s, and what they were doing and how they were doing it. And it was pretty roughneck, crowd, and there were some great mechanics. They built plants, they built trucks, they built equipment, they built devices. If you just look at some of the people, Jim Booman, Robert Oldham, some of those people that have built things over the years, it's just amazing. So if you look at those people and some of the things they did, there's some pretty talented folks. Dick Mickelbrink is another guy that put a lot of stuff together and had some input early to the association. You mentioned EC was early involved with the Ohio Precast Association. Probably prior to that, my dad was an engineer, registered professional engineer in Ohio. So if there was an issue that was at ODH or whatever, sometimes he had some street credit just by going in and saying, hey, here, I'm an engineer. I don't remember exactly when we decided we ought to start an Ohio Precast Association. I suspect memory tells me that we were at an NPCA meeting someplace, and I imagine it was Tim Gessam and myself probably Chuck Babbert, maybe Chris Waddell, Jim Booman, and we were all concerned about the new septic regulations. And at that time, Wisconsin had a strong wastewater association, which Concrete Sealants had been involved and helped found. And so Darrell Cloud and Howard Wingert were kind of the catalyst for that. I volunteered to try and help organize something. We put together a meeting in Columbus, and out of that 3 or 4 meetings, we started an association with the majority of the precasters. I think at that time there were about 30 in Ohio, and we probably had 12 maybe that expressed an interest or showed up at the meeting. And of course, the National Precast Concrete Association, started out of Dayton. So Ohio has a long history of trying to organize and make things better. One of the early people who was a great help was Tom Shank from Sport Precast in Sandusky. Tom went down to a lot of those early ODH meetings and sat through them. And I don't know how many hundreds of hours Howard Wingert had as both an attorney and an interest in the business, and his experience in Wisconsin and some other states. He was great on getting bylaws established. And I think probably for Ohio Department of Health setting some ground rules. We hired a couple of different people as administrators. The first one was Tom Freeze and his partner out of Columbus, and we were trying to influence the political regulatory process, work through a succession of people until we got Tony. It's a good idea to have an association. There's probably some things we can help ourselves with training-wise. You look at other successful associations in Ohio, the Ohio Trucking Association, the Manufacturers Association, the Petroleum Association, the Pumpers Association. If you have like businesses and like people, there is some advantage to banding together to approach things from the legislative or regulatory side. So I think it's basically a good thing. We've had some challenges, but we've also had some successes over the years. So I think it's been a good deal for precasters. I feel like I get my money out of membership. Advice for the next generation. Well, I guess don't let it drop. Don't let it lag. It's awful hard to get something restarted when you don't have the history, you don't know who's there, and the elder generation who kind of cut their teeth and learned a few things aren't always there to help you. So I would say keep it going and try and mirror what the industry's doing, what the trends are. The famous old saying, everybody's raises with the level of water, so you float everybody's boat. I think there's some truth to that. I don't want a low-cost, cheap producer in my marketplace that's making poor quality because it makes my products look bad too.
How's everyone today? I'm Howard Wingert with Concrete Sealants, for those of you who don't know me. I think I know most of you. We handed out some bag that I'd like you to open right now and get the rustling noise out of the way. And let me explain what these are. Take out the things that are in there, and you are welcome to partake during this rest of the presentation. What you have before you is Ohio Precast Concrete Association's version of a MRE, Meals Ready to Eat. Bob Shank and I sat through many meetings with the Ohio Department of Health on the commission to write the new regulations for the on-site treatment. And Bob, being the ingenious person that he is, came up with an idea on how we could suffer through those meetings in a little less sufferable manner if we could eat to keep our fighting the boredom. So he's the first one that came up with the idea. I was sitting at a meeting and all of a sudden I hear this, psst, psst, hey Howard, here's lunch. And he hands me a stack of crackers and a sleeve of cookies along with a juice box. So you now are being indoctrinated or initiated with a meal provided by the OPCA. I'm going to talk really briefly about the legislative process and the importance of what this association accomplished in being a voice at the state legislative level. One of the things that made us extremely effective in working with people from the House of Representatives, Ohio House, and the Senate was the fact that we were actually private business people acting as our own lobbyists. Now, when we first went to the State House, when these regs were starting to be talked about, it was actually, there was some discussion started around 2001 to try to have the sewage rules changed from 1979. That's how long things have taken to get things done. And in 2001, there was some discussion maybe we'll do this. Finally, by 2005, we had our very first ODH Sewage Advisory Council meeting, April 15th, bad day to start something in, 2005. They started this commission to start to change the regulations. And as Daryl mentioned and was mentioned in the presentation there, a lot of this was being an offshoot of the fact that you had a lot of states and industries saying what we've done in the past isn't good, and some of the people who are competitive materials took upon themselves to say, look at the rules that we have today and look at the crap that concrete had. Well, they were trying to take some of the new rules that were being promulgated at that time and apply it to technology that was 20, 30, 40 years old. Some of the tanks that they were saying were critical or bad had been in the ground since the 1960s. I even actually, didn't bring it with me, I have a price sheet from Weiser Concrete, big producer up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, that I think it was a 500-gallon septic tank would cost you $400, but if you wanted a bottom, it would be more. All right, that's how things were back in those days. They did, things developed, but then the regulators said, well, we've got to get rid of this junk concrete. It's like, well, wait a minute. Concrete today is still pretty good, just don't judge what the old stuff was. So in 2005, we started this regulatory process, and you talk about a magical mystery tour. It took 10 years to finally get the rules put in place that are still, as mentioned, questionable. They're in place, but not highly enforced in some counties. For some of you old folk who's been here a while, the meeting was called to order by one Scott Golden. How many remember good old Scott from ODH? Gosh, I'm getting old. There's not many people. And he was assisted by a guy named Tom Grigsby, who was also at ODH at that time, and Gene Caudell. Anyway, we went through this process beginning of April 15th, 2005, and by December, we had a whole new set of regulations that looked good until they finally came out. We went through this process every month, meeting, going through chapter and verse, sentence by sentence of what was going to be adopted. And what came out in December, some of the portions, especially about concrete septic tanks, had no resemblance of what we had discussed. And when we went back to ODH and said, what happened? They just said, sorry, it's too late, we're done, you can't change anything. And probably the best way to give you an idea of what this group meant at that time, and as was said in the video, you've got to keep this going because you do have a voice at the state. They do listen to you. We have a seat at the table with ODH. We have a seat at the table with the Department of Transportation. I'm going to read to you the testimony I gave in front of the Ohio Public Health Council, who was the court of last resort before the new regulations were going to be adopted. I gave this testimony March 9th, 2006, after we sort of got backdoored by ODH by them changing things that really would have made it difficult for you to put concrete tanks in some of your counties. So this is what I said. Ohio Precast Concrete Association represents 15 precast concrete manufacturing businesses located throughout Ohio. In addition to the precast manufacturers, OPCA membership includes an additional 8 Ohio-based companies which provide products and services to the industry. OPCA member companies provide more than 600 jobs to the Ohio economy. In 1996, precast concrete producers in Ohio formed OPCA in order to create an effective voice for the industry when working with regulatory agencies. One primary objective of the association was to work with ODH to assist in the development of new on-site sewage regulations to replace the outdated 1979 rules. OPCA has been actively engaged with ODH for the past 10 years, providing suggested draft language, industry technical information, educating ODH regarding industry quality assurance programs, and lending political support to the passage of House Bill 231. OPCA strongly supports ODH's current effort to develop new home sewage regulations. And then here's the bulk of what we were talking about that day. OPCA opposes the adoption of the draft rules as currently written. OPCA requests that the Public Health Council and Ohio Department of Health grant an extension of time to allow for the submission of additional comments regarding disputed provisions. Those disputed provisions, I had provided a packet to the Ohio Public Health Council, and that, again, if they had blessed the rules, they would have been enforced. That packet included some of the things that got changed on us, and we were wanting to try to get the wording back in, and that was something that they could all look at while we were giving this presentation. In addition to the extension time, OPCA requests that ODH utilize a more open process for rejecting written submissions. The open process we suggest would require the Department of Health to provide explanation as to why submitted written revisions are not accepted. It is OPCA's position that the time needed to make needed corrections to the current draft should take no longer than 3 months. OPCA does not support the position that the revisions process be extended an additional 12 months. That was sort of the industry's idea. Well, let's extend it another 12 months. It's like, it's gone on long enough. We don't need to do that. Nor does OPCA support any effort to seek additional legislation meant to derail the enactment of the home sewage regulations. There was a process going on in the Senate at the time led by a real good friend of the Ohio precast industry named Tom Grendell. And I say that very sarcastically. Tom Grendell hated us. Don't know why, other than I was told I somewhat insulted him at a meeting, and he sort of decided to take it out on the precasters. I can't believe I would do that to anyone. So anyway, the reasons OPCA position, too many current knowledgeable individuals have raised objections concerning the draft. The fact that ODH released 9 revisions only 6 days ago is prima facie evidence that the regulations need additional work. What we were seeking at that time was to include about 5 provisions. I had had email exchanges back and forth with ODH, and they said, it's too late, sorry, can't do it. And then 6 days before this meeting, they made 9 changes. And my point to the council was, if they could make those, why did they just out carte blanche drop ours? I make all these points because we had a voice. We had people within the House of Representatives. I could call up, Tom Lendrick could call up, Bob could call up, and they would take our phone call. We, Bob, John, and John's dad, Tom, walked around the State House. It's an interesting process. I don't know if it's as open as it used to be with security. We just wandered into the building and started knocking on doors, and by gosh, people would say, who are you? We would explain, we're with this company, we're the owner, we're that. Well, come on in. We got through a lot of doors those days that we did that, and as a result of that, this association has a voice in Columbus. You are respected, you are known, and keep this association going, you young folk. Get involved, keep it going, because this has been invaluable for your companies to be able to continue what you're doing. So that's my message for today is keep it going. Thank you.
I've got a story to tell you. Maybe you've watched during the spring and fall the flocks of geese that travel north and south. There's a reason that these geese fly in a V pattern. If you ever watch, they always fly in a V pattern. There's a reason for that. The lead goose is the leader of the pack, and he's creating an updraft for the geese behind him so that the workload of those geese behind him is less. You hear a lot of times as they're walking, you hear these geese honking, and they keep honking and honking. That's the way that the geese encourage that lead goose to keep going, keep going, keep going. Every once in a while you see a shift in this V pattern, and that's because another goose goes up front, takes the lead, and the lead goose goes to the back and takes the opportunity to get some rest. The other thing you see when you watch the geese is if one goose is injured, another goose will fall to the ground with that goose and stay with it. So that while it's healing, while it's getting better, that its foul-feathered friend can have a mate there with it. I say all that for the last half an hour, we've heard stories of person after person after person who has carried the baton, who has been in front of the geese, who has created the updraft for the association so that it can continue to carry on. Each one of us has the opportunity to participate in this event. Many, many in this audience have participated. I look around the room and I see so many who have been involved, leading, honking, and falling to the ground with a fallen brother. You know, as I look at this list, first of all, it's kind of amazing to me all the things that have occurred over the last decade. Now, I don't have 20 or 30 or 40 years experience in the Ohio precast industry. I've only been in this industry in Ohio for 12 years, going to work for Howard Wingert at Concrete Sealants just a little over a decade ago. As I looked at this, though, one of the things that struck me this morning as I was driving in is I may have the only continuity of the association as far as the leadership over the last 10 years, and that's some of the reason that I can recall some of these people. I don't remember people before this, but I do remember working with Bob Shank, a very heartfelt president of your association. And that continued continuously through name after name: Ed, Mike, Tim, Dean. Jason was a short-lived president of our association, and Mike Hoffman took over his tenure. That's why you see the asterisks by those two names. We've had executive directors come and go during that period of time. And each time somebody has picked up the burden, taken the lead, created the updraft, and carried on for the rest of the association. We had a really tough year in 2012. I won't go into all the gory details. Jason Garrett left the association. He left the industry, actually. Michael Overbay, our current executive director at that time, was terminated. We had a financial mess. Our website that we had designed for us was attacked with a virus and was completely useless. Could not be used at all. But then we built a new website. Mike Hoffman came in as our president. And then Frank Powlis and myself volunteered to carry the load and lead the geese, if you will, on for the next few years as your interim directors. What I really found interesting is a statistic that from 2009 to 2016 has been a significant growth period. The statistics of this represent over 40% growth in membership, a 36% growth in income from dues, making our association very healthy. This is not something that's normal, and this was coming out of some years at the beginning of that period that were not real friendly to everybody. So this has been a growth period for our association. It just, again, shows the strength of that pattern of geese, if you will, that have carried the association forward and continue to carry it, making it stronger in the future. We focused on some goals as an association. If you go way back to Diane Waddell, where this started, and Diane and the team that was in place at that time desired for this association to grow, be stronger, be more vibrant. These are some of the things that we wanted to do. We wanted to have better meetings. We wanted to have relationships with the Ohio Department of Transportation, the Ohio Department of Health. As you heard Howard Wingert say, we have a great representation with, we're viewed very well with the Ohio Department of Health. We have a very good relationship with the Ohio Department of Transportation. Dan Miller will be here as a speaker and has for several years. We wanted to have a dedicated quarterly newsletter. If you go out to our website, you can see the history of the newsletter since 2012. They are there, and that continues on. Stable financial future, you'll hear tomorrow if you're here at the business meeting. We have a very stable financial future. We're very vibrant as an association. We wanted to offer continuing education. For the last 3 years, we've had continuing education opportunities outside of this event where we've been able to provide education, bringing something locally that gives you access to top education like Production and Quality School, PQS1. We've had an OSHA class. This year, Tony organized the crane certification training. We also now offer professional development credit hours for this particular event. And it's just one of those things. We just keep improving, we keep growing, we keep creating the updraft for others, and hopefully for other young people to follow later on. And the really key thing that I want to say is this has all been a continuity that has led to the placement of Tony Thompson as our executive director to continue and strengthen the association moving forward. So I'll bring Tony up to the mic at this point, and she can tell you more about what's going on in the future.
Thank you, Sam. Our time is getting short. I just have a couple of things that I would mention, and they'll be brought up again tomorrow in the annual meeting. But first I want to say I'm so proud to be a part of this organization, honored to be a part of it. The history is rich, and it's an amazing group of people. And I love the family aspect that was mentioned by just about all of the speakers. It's unique, and I'm just so proud and happy to be here. Looking towards the future, we would like to see a little bit more robust, I guess, education, research, and offerings. So we're going to be asking for the formation of an education committee. It would help with such things as identifying, because you go to other meetings, you obviously go to the national meetings, but we get referrals for speakers, and that's great, but we could actually do 2 concurrent sessions in this conference both days. There's room. And so it would be nice to have those of you who are in the business and those of you who need the STS contractor CEUs to provide suggestions and maybe even help to line up those speakers for this event. But then, as Sam mentioned, here recently we've been doing separate trainings, and so we would love feedback and assistance in deciding what is best to present in the way of training for you. And so that will start in short order. We'll keep you posted on that. And then I'm very excited to announce that beginning with next year's annual conference, we will be presenting the first annual, I guess you could call it the inaugural, presentation of the OPCA Founders Award of Excellence. And so we will need a committee to help us decide on selection criteria and then a list of nominees. So very excited about that coming up. And so this provides an opportunity for you who may not be board members and may not want to serve as a board member, but you can come alongside our board and serve on one of these 2 committees. That would be awesome. And again, there would be more to our flock, as Sam put it. So thank you very much. This concludes our presentation.